Hello and welcome to Property Mastermind podcast, episode 129. Today, we're talking how to make great money in property developments when the market is going up, down, or sideways. Going to be another fab episode. Let's jump on in. Hello and welcome to episode 129. Hilary Saxon and Bob Anderson from Property Mastermind. Hey, Bob.
Hey, how you going?
Oh, really? You're going to ask me that? You know how my morning's been. I'm having one of those mornings, where you kick the side of the bed and then there's no milk left and you reverse into something. I didn't do all of those things, but lots of little things have happened and I've been having a few tantrums. It's been a bit heated, eh?
It's the temperature, it's the heat. We'll blame the sun.
Oh, well, on that.
And the fact.
Well, that's why, Bob, because you went away for the weekend and
Yeah.
I was at home and the air conditioning broke.
Yep.
That makes people very unhappy when we're rocking at about 31 degrees.
I know, it's about 35 inside the house
Oh
because
my
of the
gosh.
aircon cracking it. Yeah.
Anyway, that's my first call as soon as the shop opens. And we're doing this pre-shop opening. So straight after this podcast, I am on that phone.
You are.
Crikey.
We'll have a air conditioning mechanic within the hour.
I hope so. And you say, so I'll ask then, just out of politeness, and how are you?
Not caring.
No.
How busy are you is what we want to know. Get yourself over here.
Yes. Well, hey, Bob, before we kick into how to make money in property development when the market is going up, down, or sideways,
Yes.
what's your tip for the week?
Oh, well, you just alluded to it. I went camping on the weekend with my son, my youngest son, although he's 23, and we each have a swag and we're all set up and I've got everything in the four-wheel drive and it's looking good, and we go to set up camp sort of just before dark, and guess what? The frame for my swag, back home somewhere.
You didn't tell me that. Oh my God. So what happened? You just had a mush pillow. What was it?
I've got a swag that's just sitting on the ground. It has to take form. I have to climb inside there and sleep.
Oh.
Fortunately, I did have some rope, so I found a spot between trees and I'm hanging guy ropes off trees and stretching it, trying to get it into a shape that I can at least crawl in at night.
A true Australian.
True Australian. Anyway, we did. Ingenuity prevailed, and I got it to work.
Did you get some photos?
I think the tip is, and every time I go camping, I think about it, is to have a really comprehensive checklist to tick it off. Instead of me, I'm sort of running around. Oh, I'll have that. Yes, I need that, and I need that, and because you forget stuff.
Sounds a bit like property development, Bob. Have yourself a good checklist.
It's funny. We have a good checklist with property development. I need one for camping.
Yes, okay. You need a checklist for camping. Just on that. So he says to me the night before, "You're okay that I go? You sure you don't want to come?" And I'm like, oh my gosh. There's no chance in the world you'd get me camp. I have done my fair share of camping in my life, tons of it. I used to be a water skier, so we used to camp for about a month over Christmas. But seriously, camping,
New Zealand?
Yeah, in New Zealand. Camping,
things don't come out and kill you.
I know. Bob sends me a video of a goanna. How big was it, Bob?
Oh, there's a few there, 1.5 meters.
A few. Even the fact that there was more than one
came right up.
Gave me the hoobie boobies.
Came right up to our camp table. Looking for some handouts.
Are you serious? Did you feed it?
No, I didn't feed it, but it was obviously looking for a feed.
How close did it get to you?
Oh, a metre.
Oh my! I honestly, I actually would have had a coronary at that. I would not have coped.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can keep your camping for you and your son, and yeah.
I'll have to remember to get a can of goanna repellent.
Yeah. It's called a shotgun.
Don't you dare. Don't you dare, you Kiwi, come and attack our native wildlife.
Oh my gosh. I remember the first time I saw one, before we jump into the topic, and I was walking up Mount Cootha in Brisbane, and I saw this giant goanna, and I actually didn't know they existed. I thought it was one of those things from Indonesia, the Komodo dragons, and I actually thought I was at Jurassic Park. I ran as fast as I could. Oh my gosh.
Welcome to Australia.
It was awful. But anyway.
Let's
get on track with the whole how to make money in property development, whether the market is going up, down, or sideways. Bob, let's just start by talking about what are markets. What are property markets?
Well, when you're talking about markets, there's markets within markets within markets. So you could talk about the Australian property market. Well, that's a massive market. And how many sub-markets are there? Well, there's heaps. What about state? You might say, well, what's the New South Wales property market doing? But you can't answer that question because you've got regional and you've got cities and how do you break that down? You might say, oh, what about Sydney? What's the Sydney property market doing? And that can be behaving differently, different suburbs. I can remember back around the time of the GFC when everybody's getting a bit scared because nobody knew what was going on much, particularly the banks. And during that year, 2008, 2009, the Bayside suburbs of Melbourne, they're quite upmarket, say Brighton and Sandringham, they went up in value 15% during that year, while the rest of the world's panicking. Yet other parts of the same city did nothing, and some parts even on the outskirts went backwards. So, and not just, I'll just use that as an example, but that can be happening, and you can have suburbs in a city that are going into oversupply, for instance. So, just back to what is a market. Well, I think that as property developers, we have to go right down to suburban level and even sub-suburban level. So what's the market doing? It's good to look at the macro market. Like, lots of things drive investment, drive values. Big things. Unemployment, that's a national thing, although it can be localised. Like, what are we talking about? We're talking about interest rates. That has an effect. These are big things. These are macro things. But then you can go micro right down to sub-suburban. So it is hard to define a market. And as a property developer, we're suburban or sub-suburban level. But we still are affected by the big things. Like I mentioned, interest rates, inflation, what the RBA is doing.
What is their biggest impact on it, Bob? Which one is the...
Well,
I actually I'm going to throw something in when you answer it.
Here we go.
No.
You love throwing things at me.
Yeah.
The biggest driver of growth, increasing in value, property growth, has been population growth. That's been the driver.
Always, pretty much.
Not always. And we had a great example coming out of the back of COVID that we had a huge increase in property prices that had nothing to do really with growth because there was no international migrants.
This is what I was going to bring up. That's when the government got involved and they played around with it. It wasn't happening naturally.
It wasn't a natural thing. No. Yeah.
Explain that so people
Well,
understand.
let me take a step back. Prior to COVID, and now it's happening again.
Yeah.
Population growth is the biggest factor that drives up values. And 60% of our property population growth was overseas migration. We know that just died during COVID. 40% is natural growth, births versus deaths. But while there was no overseas migration coming, which is the biggest driver of population, we had that big boom. So that came off the government incentives at the back of COVID. Whether they were good or bad, it's debatable, but they wanted to drive the economy. The biggest way to do that's property because there's so many things that hang off property. So many businesses and industries that work with property. It's such a big market, and it was the easiest for them to play with, and they did. And that plus the euphoria of coming out of COVID and didn't really die, and realizing
that the human race survived it.
Yeah,
most
after people scaring us to death, and so that euphoria, and then that fear of missing out as value started to move. And, that had one of the biggest increases in property values ever with almost very little organic property growth.
And that not having enough
but that's
product.
Extreme. I mean,
that freaked people out. People were panicking.
Yeah. And the rush for the beach.
Yeah.
And the rush for, initially the rush to the country. Get away from the cities. Get away from the pandemic and all this sort of stuff, and then the rush to the seaside. People are saying, "Well, I'm not going to wait till I'm retired to pack up my bags and go to the beach. I'm going to do it now while I'm still alive," sort of thing. It's weird times. So when you think back on it, it's so weird. But anyway, so those sort of big drivers. But ultimately, we have to study our market
Yeah.
down the bottom. But yeah, look,
And those two things probably, we're hoping, won't happen again. We won't have something like COVID affecting and sending us all somewhat crazy. Fall into that category if
it
you
might be a
wish.
bit different next time there's a
And
pandemic around.
the government probably isn't going to do that sort of muck around with.
God knows what the government will do, but yeah, I mean, it's not something that happens too often. So we've got to look at what normally happens, and we've got to look at normal market drivers and sort of base our decisions on that. But then, we're also talking about the residential market.
Yeah.
But then there's the whole commercial market, which is what we call commercial, industrial, and retail. That can be behaving quite differently from residential markets as well.
I think that's something that when you're new to property development, or even you maybe doing some for a while, but you don't actually consider that while one particular product, and we could even go down to duplexes and townhouses, but if we were to compare residential with the commercial, whether that be industrial or whatever it is, they can behave completely different at the same time. It's almost like, what do you call a seesaw that's got four on it? It's almost like we've got product, as in residential versus commercial, but then we've got areas versus, the markets, and they all play a part. So
the macro and the micro. That you just reminded me of something when you were talking about even, say, residential products behaving differently. I cast my mind back to Brisbane.
Cast my mind back. Ooh.
You like that?
I do. I cast my. I'll use that in a speech for sure.
Well, I didn't. That's an oldie. It's probably too old for you, which is why you don't know it.
It's great in it. It's great in a speech, though. Anyway, sorry.
So once again, I'm cast my mind back to 2014 or thereabouts.
Yeah.
And let's just take a locality. It was Brisbane, right? So for a couple of years, we'd been developing. Not really apartments, basically townhouses and some subbies. Around 2014, the Brisbane City Council introduced a new planning scheme. It was the first one since 2000. The 2000 one had lots of band-aids all over it, and it was time for a new one. The way they pointed it is they drove it towards doing apartments. What they wanted to do, under some pressure from the state government, they wanted to increase densities in Brisbane. And obviously apartments are a higher density use of land than townhouses. So the new scheme tended to push development a bit more towards apartments. You could still do townhouses, but there were sort of incentives towards apartments. And also in 3 suburbs where they wanted more apartments, they upzoned it from what was normally a typical 2-story townhouse to where you could do 5-story apartment blocks.
Wow.
And so what that did, that sucked in a lot of activity. So a lot of people went in there, they're buying up land, they're getting DAs for apartments. And those that were really quick bought sites before a lot of the landowners knew about the upzoning and what was happening. So they're buying sites for 5-story apartments that were really getting bought for townhouse sites. So where you might get 4 townhouses on an 800-metre lot previously, you're now getting like 14 apartments on a 5-story building with ground level parking. So the entrepreneurs led, others then just bought it at market value, getting DAs. So what it really meant, cut the story back a bit, is that lots and lots of apartments were approved and got built. Brisbane traditionally wasn't a place where there's lots and lots of apartments, not like, say, Melbourne or Sydney even. And it reached a point where, first of all, how do you market them? So a lot of overseas buyers were around at the time, that 2014-15 mark, It's before the clamps were put on overseas purchases, both what happened in China, because the Chinese government put the clamps on, and we put the clamps on here a fair bit. So a lot of them were, first of all, sold to overseas purchasers and then interstate purchasers. Because people in Melbourne thought, man, I could buy 2 apartments for the price of one in Sydney, I'll buy 2. But nearly all investment market stock. And so that market hit a peak, had to come off the boil a bit. They were hard to sell. There was too many of them. It was an overheated market. At the same time, in the same city, you're flat out finding new new townhouse developments because the move was like more towards apartments, even small apartment blocks, 6-packs. And so there was a bit of a shortage of townhouses while there's a big oversupply of apartments. And then land, you couldn't get it, blocks of land. And I can remember my son Luke at the time, he wanted to buy, he wanted to build a new house, wanted to buy a block of land, build a new house. And he scoured everywhere looking for one. He finally found a fairly large estate, but he had to sign an expression of interest 2 years before the land would be ready.
Holy heck.
And about a year out, he was buying land that was 2 stages ahead of what was being developed. It was just cow paddocks, basically. Wasn't buying it. He couldn't settle on it. You had to put an EOI down. And then eventually they got to a point where they were about a year out and you could sign off plan contracts on the land. And then when it came time to settle, they had 5 backup contracts on the lot that he wanted to buy. And so here you are in a situation in the same city at the same time. People are waiting like 2 years to get into this new estate to buy land where townhouses are in fairly short supply. And there was a massive oversupply of apartments all at the same time, same city, all residential, but different products. And in fact, the whole unit market, apartment market, had been targeted at middle ring suburbs investor market. There was actually a shortage of 3-bedroom owner-occupier market in the upmarket areas. I read fairly early what was going to happen and pretty well extricated myself out of those 2-bedroom investment apartments, except for the last project I did. I had to discount that a bit. And then started to do some 3-bedroom, not 2-bedroom, owner-occupier, not investor, upmarket suburbs, not average middle ring suburbs.
Apartments or townhouse?
Yeah, apartments.
Okay.
So even the apartment market, although I say it's saturated, it was saturated with smaller 2-bedroom apartment investor stock in the middle ring suburbs. Not what I moved to quickly, which was good, 3-bedroom apartments, purely owner-occupier in upmarket suburbs. And they were doing well. So even apartments was separated hugely by the buyer and the location.
Renter location.
And the bedroom size, I suppose.
Do you know
3,
what?
not 2.
You've just pointed out there's something that I wanted to bring up, Bob, and that is to be street smart. So for you to read that market, know that it was coming, and then pivot, change. Use the COVID word. Love that word.
I haven't used that word for a while.
I know, it has been a while. I think I've used it in a podcast somewhere. So, but you pivoted in time, and you just had that
almost in time.
Yeah. Were you already, were you too deep in to get out of the other one or not?
Yeah, I was well advanced on one project. Well advanced, too far. I started construction.
And you said heavily discounted. So what did that mean?
Not heavily, still made a profit.
Yeah.
Probably the way it worked out at the time, these things were selling for about $450. We used to make about $80,000 net profit on an apartment. I think by the time I discounted those, we made about $40,000.
Right.
So I still made a profit, but not at the margin that we would have wanted to. But hey, that's one of the things.
You were just cracking Shandong, not Bollinger at the end. Is that what we're saying?
I was cracking a few tinnies, I think, by the end of that.
Oh no, you were just on the tinnies.
That's back to the tinnies.
Oh,
dear. I mean,
Forex.
that raises something else. With property development, there's quite a lot of fat in it. If you think about your margin, let's say you're doing a project where your margin is 20% on cost.
Yep.
That's your profit. Well, the market has to drop by that much before you even lose a dollar.
Yeah. And
the markets, if you have a look at how much markets have dropped at their worst in the last 100 years in Australia, they haven't dropped that. And when I say markets, I'm probably talking, state or national markets, not a locality. You can have a regional town that runs one industry and that industry leaves and, unemployment's 25%. I'm not talking about stuff like that. So you have a big buffer. That's what I'm saying. Your buffer is your profit with property development. So even if things turn on the way like that one did, I only made half the profit I had hoped to make, but I was still fine. Those that didn't get out, I don't think many lost money, but some probably barely made much at all at that time. and it was slow going. You couldn't sell off plan. You had to finish your apartment block and then put it to the market. What got hurt a bit was probably rentals. Rentals dropped because, remember, a lot of those early sales were made by overseas purchasers. Well, they either buy it and just don't rent it, or they rent it, and now you're talking the rental market. All the interstate buyers from Victoria and Sydney who bought in quite early in the piece, they want renters, and there's only so many renters in a locality. That's why the owner occupier one went well for me when I sort of got out of it.
It's a great reminder of why financiers can be, a bit tough, because they need to know that their butt's covered should something happen, and that kind of really explains that. You brought up something else, Bob, when you were talking then about the market having to sell. You could no longer sell off plan. That's very interesting. So people were not prepared to buy unless they had some sort of emotional attachment. Is that what you were saying, or they felt safe with it? Or what was it?
Because there was a lot of apartments, not just on the market, but being built. There's like 12, 15 months supply coming through. Remember in those days, we could build a 5-story apartment block in 9 months.
Yeah.
Now you're flat out getting a builder to build you a duplex, or a house builder to build your house in 9 months.
So we could even a deck on your house.
Yeah, pretty much. So we could punch out a 5-story building in 9 months, and so it's not a big lag time. In terms of predicting markets, but you can still get a change in that time as well. And build costs went up at the same time.
Just like now.
Because builders that were building apartments were really busy, and tradies, and they could, we'll go back a step, back to, and that was local. That was a Brisbane orientated thing that was actually brought about by the council, as it turned out.
So, Bob, that sort of you being street smart and able to see that happening.
Always looking at the market, trying to predict markets, looking ahead.
So
and
that
that's
was
one part of the market.
Yeah.
That I saw the city plan was going to drive it that way, that it was going to drive a lot more towards apartments. And a couple of sites that we pivoted to do something else, other than what was obviously going to be too much.
That brings me to, because I've got a few points that I want to cover off for people to understand, and one of them is data. Was this data driven for you? Like, data is your best friend. So the first point is you need to be street smart, which Bob was. He was like, hold on, got to make a change. But was this data driven, or how did you?
No, it's not, because data can only ever be past data,
right?
Past data or current. Future is predictions. It's not data.
So where were you getting your info from, Bob?
Well, you look for lots of sources. So in this case, there were changes made. There was a whole new town plan, city plan brought out.
Yep.
And so I attended some of the meetings where they were talking about the proposals, because they were taking public feedback on it. But really, councils already know what they're going to do. That's just a token when they ask the public to join in and comment. The public will join in and comment. The agenda.
They just do what they want anyway.
Yeah, of course, but
that sounds like men in general.
It just makes people feel okay, like they've had a say.
Men in general, I'm thinking.
But I followed that, and talking to town planners. Some of them had actually. I knew a town planner who had worked on the city plan, because sometimes, like when they do a whole new town plan, they sometimes bring in external.
Right.
Consultants, high level town planning consultants to help them as well. And I knew one of them, so I sort of had a little bit of a tip on the way it was heading and what I was doing. And I was mostly doing 5-story apartment blocks at the time, and then I could read it. So that wasn't data driven. That was saying this planning scheme is going to change, and it's going to there's going to be a lot of apartments getting built, and I don't want to go into an oversupply situation, so I pulled back. One of them was under construction, couldn't do anything about that. And that was the one I had to discount a bit at the end. So that wasn't data driven. But the thing about data is, like, as property developers, I look at the big thing that's happening. I look at interest rates. Like, we were tracking all those interest rate rises, and you're trying to predict, well, when's it going to stop, and what effect have those increases having on your market, say on your purchases. And of course, what effect does it have on your feasibilities? as well. So
it wasn't just following the council town plan; it was also looking at interest rates.
back then it was, because I
Yeah.
could see a big thing. Normally a town plan's probably fairly static, so we know what we can do pretty much. So we're looking at. So I'm looking at the macro things. You know, I'm obviously I was tracking interest rates. I knew when inflation spiked, but remember that two of the big drivers of the inflation was the big increase in house values. That's a big driver of inflation, and fuel prices. And a lot of that came out of not having big supplies of fuel here and what was happening in the Ukraine. So and that made it spike and jump to 7 plus. But they were just two things. But then we've seen, the basket of goods, as it were, and we've seen inflation come up. So it's obvious that when inflation rises that the RBA is going to use the only stick they've got to belt you with, and that's interest rates. So it's obvious that they were going to go up. The point is, how much do they go up? When do they stop? And so you're trying to predict when they're going to tap out. And I've probably got it right to within 125 basis point. I wasn't quite predicting the last one. I thought it came a bit quick, but then I think it's had it. But you're always looking at those macro markets. You're looking at unemployment, but look, unemployment's it's crazy. Well, it's lifting. The unemployment rate's lifted a little bit, but it's still way below the long-term average. Actually, need more unemployment.
Yeah, I watched something this morning about that. Yeah, gosh, am I turning into you watching stuff about that? Anyway.
Well, but then we haven't had price growth. Not price growth, wages growth a lot. There's been pressures, but it hasn't, and so there has been some in more recent times. There's been wage growth, which sort of comes off the back of inflation because workers want to earn more money because they're paying more at the the checkout. But
it's called making the ends meet.
Yeah. You never get everything in pure balance.
No.
There's sort of a probably not too bad unemployment rate, which might be sort of different economists will have different opinions because it's not just the unemployment rate. There's a whole heap of other things, the impact on it. But they might say, 4.5% might be good, or 5%, and then what's a good interest rate, and that's driven by lots of things, and not just what happens in Australia either. But
that sort of,
they were never going to stay at 2%.
No,
home loan rate,
gosh, no,
1.9 something.
And that all of that stuff consolidated affects us as property developers. Yeah. But I think what you just alluded to, Bob, is that you were street smart, and it's not about data because data is about current and past. So how is data useful in helping you
I think trends.
Data trends.
Yeah,
Got you.
Not look at the data today and say, okay, this month or this week, this is it. It has to be taken into context. Yeah. And so it's more trending. Like when interest rates started to go up, it was obvious we weren't going to get one or two increases.
No.
I didn't know where it was going to end. I did predict actually right at the beginning it was probably interest like the standard variable home loan rate was going to tap at about 5.25. Sort of gone 5.5, so I was probably not too far out on that. But that's sort of what it needed to get to, and it creates a bit of pain for people, obviously. But it has to work as well, and so that's not a data driven thing. But I think using data to try and predict trends as much as you can. But you're looking at lots of things, but particularly you're looking at local. I'm talking about the macro stuff when I'm talking about that.
But as in for people developing and looking for where your market's going to be, where your patch is going to be. Yeah. So that's what we're talking, the macro side of that.
We've chosen patches. Like we've had a patch where we've done some projects. We've sort of withdrawn from that patch now because it's sort of tending towards a bit of oversupply. But
that's not for long.
It's only for a period of time. Look, just because something gets a bit overheated now doesn't mean it'll stay that way. And the thing about
turn the element down, it just cools off a bit before it turns back up.
The thing about property development is we're often having to predict as best we can 2 years in advance. You think about this, and particularly at the moment when build times are still slow.
Yes.
If you're doing a duplex, could easily be a 20-month project, and in some states could be beyond 24 months. How long to get an approval? There's places, there's councils in Australia that you'll spend 9 months getting an approval or more for a duplex, and then you've got to get your building permit, then you've got to choose your builder, then you've got to get it built, then you've got to get it sold. it could be a 26-month project.
It's ridiculous.
Then there's other parts of Australia where you get much quicker development permits. Probably your build time is still slow, and it might be probably, about as tight as you'll get. It'd be about 20 months in most cases, So you might not be selling your product for 18 to 20 months, or in some cases, even 24 months. You're selling into a market that's 2 years off existing. What's it going to be like then? Well, it's a crystal ball. How do you know? But there are things that you can do to look indicators.
Yeah.
Like in terms of market corrections and prices going backwards, we've had it. It finished almost a year ago. And I'm just talking about capital cities at the moment. I'm not talking about suburbs, because you'd have to know which suburb you're talking about. But the increases, we've had a month-on-month increase every month. Capital cities average, but they've been very low. But now look at the migrant population that's coming back in. Talking about 300,000 coming back in a year. And these aren't poor people.
Are these purchasers or renters, Bob?
They're renters initially, and then they become purchasers. But these are people who've had to earn their way here. Mostly professional people, higher income people.
So
they're not refugees.
No, we're looking at people who are looking for decent places to rent.
Oh, and a lot of them. We know a lot of the interstate overseas migration does go to Sydney and goes to Melbourne, it goes to Brisbane. It did spread around a bit. The two big cities get most of it, and that's a big driver, population growth, as we talked about. Now, overseas migration, not just me, everybody knew it's going to create a lot of pent-up demand, at the back end of COVID when they're allowed to come back in. There's a lot of pent-up demand, and it obviously happened. And they didn't just see Australia as a great place to work, but they saw it as a very safe place compared to a lot of places at the back end of COVID.
I think we're looking, I read some numbers last week, in the next 12 months was 600,000, which I thought it was going to be 800. It was around 580. I did read something
Probably in the
somewhere.
next 2 years.
Whatever that was.
Yeah.
But, for people developing, thinking, okay, rentals, are these families, are these individuals coming in? What does this say to the people that listen to this? What does it say? Right now, it's a good time to develop what and where, if we're looking at overseas migration.
Well, that'll go to the capital cities.
Yep.
But it'll drive the economy as well. It'll drive the market a lot. But
as in, it'll spike prices.
Remember, there's still a lot of Australians. Population growth
growing.
Still solid.
Yeah. We've got kids wanting houses.
Deaths versus births, but then we've got a lot of 20s, 30s coming through the market if they've been saving their pennies.
Oh, that's our next podcast, I think, Bob.
Have to tell me more about that.
There's those getting into that housing market, getting into the development market, saving the money to get started. Yeah.
But at just our organic population growth in Australia, not even considering overseas migration, is still very solid.
Yeah.
Of all the OECD countries, it's right up there on a percentage basis. So there's lots of reasons for developing. There's lots of locations, but you mentioned before, just because a location doesn't work now, and it might not work now because it's a little bit overheated. So say an area moves into oversupply. Too many people have built duplexes in this area. Too many people are building. Not so much apartments these days, and that'll happen again. Well, guess what? It's not going to stay oversupplied for all that long, because developers will start to see there's a bit of an oversupply. They'll back off. People stop buying sites there for a while. People stop getting DAs there for a while. People who've got DAs even might not build for a while. And that oversupply will get mopped up. And then it can even turn back into, in 2 years' time, there could be a bit of an undersupply, because people had backed off. The oversupply might have been mopped up in 9 months, but then we know a project can take 2 years sometimes. So you can go from oversupply to undersupply.
And that goes back to following trends, doesn't it? Remember a while ago we were down in Brisbane and talking about apartments, and there are an awful lot of smaller 1 and 2 bedrooms quite close to the city, and maybe that's similar to Melbourne and Sydney as well.
Yeah.
But there's a lot more happening, and I said to you, isn't this going to create an oversupply and devalue the ones there? And you said it'll more than likely have the opposite effect, which I hadn't considered, meaning that it'll create more of a demand, more people will want to go there, and it'll lift up the prices. Because I just thought, the older ones would lose their value.
Well, it'll lift them up.
Yeah.
Because replacement value.
Right.
So any new developments of any sort, it costs more to build now.
Right.
And the land costs more. So you have to sell them for more to make your margin. Now, sometimes you got to wait for the market to catch up a bit on some things. And we've seen apartment builders buying sites, but they've got a 3 to 5 year view on big apartment blocks, but they know it's coming, And so, yeah, like whatever it costs to build a 1-bedroom apartment today is more than it cost, say, 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Same with the land component. And so you have to sell it at a margin. It'll just drag those prices up. That's the way the market always does. Whatever is the going rate will drag it up, and it will. Oversupply's a temporary thing.
Yeah.
It comes and goes. It never stays that way. One of the biggest examples of oversupply that eventually rights itself would have to be the Gold Coast market. It has a boom where you get like thousands and thousands and thousands of apartments oversupplied, and then it just stops. And then slowly,
and then there's homeless
people.
It
gets mopped up.
Yeah,
it is a maturing market. It's not as bad as it used to be like that. But like particularly in my day there, it takes 2 or 3 years and they mop it all up, and then it starts going into undersupply. And next thing, developers will jump back in. That's like an extreme market that is maturing.
So, Bob, if we were to wrap this one up, because we're getting on, it's getting past people's listening time.
Yeah.
So, if we were to, two things, we've got to give away the book, but if we were to, in summary, how to make money in a market that's good, going up, going down, or moving sideways, can you give me your top few tips there?
Well, when it's going up, I mean, that's always good because you do a feasibility today, you'll probably make more money when you get there unless it changes. Going sideways, it'll only do that for so long. So you need to say, is it likely to go up? Remember, markets go up for a lot longer period than they ever go down. That's why property values go up.
Great tip there.
I don't
say that again, Bob.
Property values go up for a longer period of time than they ever go down. When they go down, it's usually a fast correction, often due to an oversupply, but not always. So remember that more often than not, if you do a feasibility in a project, you'll make more money at the other end than you intended at the beginning. But you don't want to necessarily go the other way. So, if you need to sit on a project, if the market in your area changes that much and you need to sit on it, or even sell it, be prepared to not make a profit and maybe look at another area. Like this is in a tough market.
Yep.
If you can sit it out, or an alternative use for that product, I'm talking about more tough times.
Yes.
But remember, you do have a buffer as a property development, as a property developer, but getting it financed is the thing. If it gets financed and it goes quieter while you're building, well, you're going to make less profit. That's all it is.
And as long as you've been financed and you had a good profit margin and you've done your feasibility correctly and your due diligence, then you.
But if there is a tip,
Yeah.
It's have a look at the macro market, those sort of things that affect the whole of Australia. Just, I get an understanding of that, but it's right down to suburban level or even sub-suburban level when it comes to developing. So understand that market, what's going on, talk to as many agents as you can that sell new projects. Just really try and understand that market, where it's going, who's buying, owner-occupiers, investors, what are they looking for, what where the demand is in that suburb.
And I'd almost add a wee bit more there is, unless that person's an absolute expert, I'd talk to a few people in the real estate game because there's always
one.
No, there's always, just because somebody's rowdy doesn't mean they know everything.
No, usually it's the rowdy ones that don't know all that much. But,
social media, be careful.
Very careful.
And so they're great tips, Bob. Big chat this morning on the economy and property development. We're going to give away the book today to Marina Nest. Woohoo! This is coming out to you. I spoke to you this week.
Present.
Yes, it'll be in the post. I even have your address. So it will go in the post today. And remember, you still have time to get your copy of you won't have time. Oh, you probably won't make it. 3 ones. And unless you want to get it for a New Year's read off hilarysaxton.com, we'll put a link in the bottom.
Might
Shameless plug for my own.
with somebody for a little while after Christmas, so get it.
Yes.
Any females in your life need to see that book.
They do.
Well, not just see it, need to read it.
All righty. Well, thanks, everybody. I hope you got a lot out of our episode today. And we will, this is coming out, not that we're in the new year. This is 2024, this podcast. Or is it this week? Well, can't remember. Actually, no, this might be this week.
Let's make it this week.
Okay, it's this week. This is prior to Christmas. This is a pre-Christmas one. Which reminds me, for those of you in our community, last Q&A for the year, we're having a drink. So if you're on our Q&A on Wednesday night at 5 Brisbane time, 6 your time, if you're not, or 3 or wherever you are, 3:30 or 4:30, whatever. Our time, it's 5.
We even have people coming in from overseas in our Q&A.
We do on occasion. So remember, it's glass of wine time. But anyway, we will catch you next week.
Look forward to it.
Bye for now.
Bye.